Welcome to the Off the Wire podcast, your playbook for navigating the fast-paced world of cybersecurity and technology. Get ready for a front row seat as we deliver play-by-play analysis on current industry issues, break down the latest technologies, and provide real-time commentary to help businesses overcome their ongoing technology struggles.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Off the Wire. I'm your host, Anthony Kent. And today I've got a special treat for everyone. We have our new co-host, Tanner Greer. One of the things about Tanner I'll talk about is he exemplifies the cooperation among cooperatives model. And I know, I got back into the co-op world about 6 years ago. And I know that I've met Tanner at some of the conferences and introduced myself. So I knew some people from Blue Ridge from years ago. And anyways, we quickly hit it off, and he became a resource for me and some of the folks in my department. And matter of fact, I think it was 2 years ago. I believe it was 2 years ago at the Cooperative Technology Expo, or CTCE. Don't ask me exactly what that stands for. What is it? Cooperative Technology Expo,
I think
Carolinas, or is that?
Honestly, I probably should know.
Anyways,
that.
It was the one we had. Yeah, we should. It was one that was hosted in Myrtle Beach, but this was 2 years ago, and I'm not sure how we got on the topic, but Tanner was talking about microsegmentation, and honestly, me and Earl, he's an assistant administrator with our group, we were kind of just listening in awe because we hadn't seen any of those software applications out there, and we knew we had some things to tackle, and we were just thinking about how awesome it would be to have something like that. But anyways, Tanner's been a great resource and someone, I think highly of. And anyways, I'm glad to have him on the podcast. And matter of fact, just one thing, after us hashing everything out, Tanner got to work coming up with a bunch of topics to cover on the podcast. And the one we're going to cover today is actually one that he put the topic out there, and that's what happens when users go to home. But before we get into the topic, let me turn over to Tanner, and he can give a introduction to himself.
Yeah, appreciate that. I just want to say, I think you're selling yourself short. I think we rely on each other, just like many other people at different co-ops. And I think in a lot of different industries too, there's that kind of camaraderie between people that are kind of doing the same thing and going through maybe the same struggles, things like that. But really just happy to be here. Really appreciate you letting me join. I'm excited to kind of jump on a podcast. Been thinking about doing one for a while, and saw the opportunity to maybe just co-host one and learn from you and kind of learn the ropes a little bit. A little bit about me. So I've been in the co-op world for about 15 years. All that experience has been in IT. I've been working electric cooperative since I graduated. Had a bachelor's degree from Appalachian State University, computer information systems. Luckily, I was able to kind of intern at our cooperative and then, get into a kind of an entry-level role right after college. So I've started kind of from the entry level. I went from help desk, had a couple different roles in between, network specialist, system admin, and then eventually kind of got into the leadership roles, managing our infrastructure group, and then being a director of our IT group, and then eventually my current role as a CTO. So 8 years out of that 15, I've either been kind of working on the technical side or that kind of the planning management side of cybersecurity, and then just really technology in general. And I'm really excited about that new role that I have. I really get excited about thinking about kind of the puzzle pieces, like when we need to do what things, and like what things can we wait on and what things do we have to do now. Looking forward to just diving into the podcast with you. We got a lot of great topics, and just excited to want to talk about the one tonight. And then also this podcast has helped me. Joining a podcast that's helped me and kind of changed some of what I think, and then being able to help others. And I think we're going to be able to do that through our episodes. So yeah, this is the kind of the topic I broached, and you kind of really latched onto it. What happens when the users go home? I mean, we spend a lot of time at work. We spend a lot of time trying to, secure things in a particular environment, and then everybody just takes their devices and walks away from that environment. What do you think about that?
One of the things that actually COVID helped with, the only thing I'll say is, allowing people to work from home. For a lot of co-ops, I think prior to COVID, they never, supported or allowed working from home. Matter of fact, our organization, we didn't have the ability for a lot of things to do a lot of things at home, like taking phone calls. And the technology was there. We just didn't have it enabled, because it was just never thought of. But COVID, the only good thing that I can think of was really just opening that door. It's, and I say it's a good thing. It's not a good thing for us trying to secure networks, because it kills trying to protect your perimeter and, thinking that's going to do you a lot of good. But, and outside of that, really even outside of COVID, this door was already open just with mobile devices. You got iPads, you got iPhones or Androids or whatever type of device. Those are work devices now. They're not just, a personal device. On top of that, personal devices can access a lot of corporate resources. So, it really changed our world, and we had to do a lot of transitioning on, not only with technology, but just in our thought process. For our co-op, ever since COVID, we have a policy to where we support people working remotely 1 day a week, which is good. We've got a GIS programmer, he really is crunching out code and stuff like that. Him working remotely, it doesn't really change a whole lot for him. We're getting the same product that we are, whether he's in the office or not. And I'll say, me personally, I've enjoyed it. A lot of times I'll find if I work remotely, I'm able to focus on things that I can't focus on at work with all the distractions. So I find it beneficial on occasion to work remotely. That said, this is taking security to it's made it much more complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't have quite as much, I guess, like structured work from home. We do a lot of like ad hoc. We try to be very flexible with people. I agree with you. I think there's not much silver lining with COVID, but one of the things was that we proved that we could do things from home, right? I mean, I think we kind of knew we could, but nobody really tested it. So, I mean, what better test than just to throw everybody right at it? But if you think about it, even if you take away like people working from home remotely, like even if you just take that completely away, I mean, mobile devices with our field operations and a lot of people, right? And whether you got your trucking companies or anything, I mean, all of a sudden there's people working on devices that are mobile, right, for their job. So even if you don't work from home, we already were pushing our technology out into the field. And so we were going to have devices out and about on cell networks and, maybe not home networks, I guess, per se, but definitely on cell networks. We spent a lot of time, we talked about this a lot, securing our corporate networks via all those things, securing the perimeter, trying to secure kind of east and west traffic and things like that. We put in all these different devices. We got next gen firewalls, endpoint software, network monitoring, security operations that are monitoring our networks 24/7. And like you said, the boundaries all of a sudden changed on us, right? People went home and, there wasn't a firewall in between, John Doe and his Spectrum, router at his house. So yeah, things had to change. And I think we're going to talk about some of those things and really like what people do, but also like how do we react to that? We have to adapt, right?
Yeah. So we'll cover some of the things that we feel folks are doing at home. And honestly, I'm probably a little naive at some of the things that people do at home, but we'll do our best to kind of give some examples. And then later we'll talk about, some of the things you can do to help either remediate or mitigate some of that risk. I guess the first thing is just people are, they're connecting to less secure networks. They're either, sometimes they're at a conference, they could be at a hotel, they could be at a coffee shop working. That has happened. They've got their home networks, and some home networks would probably scare me more than the public access points to some degree. I was trying to think, it was a few years back, and I'm sure it's still happening all the time, but there was a lot of stuff where, a lot of those home routers, they had like 0 days and they had, critical exploits, and they were making the headline news quite a bit. So people who got those devices, did they know to update their routers? A lot of that, I'm sure a lot of devices out there have never been updated.
Yeah, how many home users? How many of your employees do you think will be able to update their home router? Not too many, I don't think.
I would say,
yeah,
5%. I think would be pushing it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, I don't think Linksys or Belkin sends out emails on 0 days. They might, but I've never heard of anything like that.
Yeah.
So one thing we're kind of talking about too is like obviously connectivity is less secure, right? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. But at the same time, like when people have a computer at home, they tend to use the computer a little bit differently. You kind of come into work, you like sit in your office, you kind of know where you're at. When you're at home, you might do some personal things on a computer that you wouldn't do at work. You gotta pay a bill. You're gonna browse social media while you're cooking your lunch. Things like that. And there's a lot of dangers on social media. I mean, you got crazy people sending you links to stuff. People have been hacked, and then their accounts are now like being used to spread malware and things like that. You got random friend requests for people that just created a profile about 10 minutes ago. And I think you were actually telling me you had like an example of this where there was like a program trying to gather some data from one of your users.
So yeah, I've got a interesting story, and it's not even, it's a legitimate tool, and that tool is called Zoom Info. A lot of the telemarketers and stuff like that, they pay for a subscription to that. And anyways, we had suspected, well, I've personally had this happen to me where I've had people call me on my work cell phone, and one day I just straight asked the telemarketer, I was like, how did you get this number? And he's like, we have a subscription to Zoom Info. But with so we use Avidon for our email security, and it measures how many phishing attempts per user. And we had a user blow up, and in a month he had 241 phishing emails that it had blocked.
Wow.
So normally on a high note we've got 30, which is still high, but the 241, it stood out. And we had actually noticed a finding from CrowdStrike that showed that he went to a site, and it really wasn't like a malicious site, but it's the ads that it had on it. So
Gotcha.
basically some adware was trying to capture his data and push it to Zoom Info. And actually CrowdStrike told us that. And this was already after the fact that he was up to like 240 phishing emails that were sent against him in a month. So what I had him do is I had him, Zoom Info is a legitimate site though, even though it's used by malicious actors, it is a legitimate site as well. And I had him do a request to get his information removed. And so he went from 200, it was like 241 to 42 phishing emails that went out to him after a full month, letting that sink in. That was a source. It's kind of crazy. If you ever have someone that's getting bombarded, a lot of times Zoom Info will have their information, and getting that removed can help out.
I mean, I'm just thinking to yourself, when you said 240, I've seen like, what phishing tests look like as far as percentage clicked. And if someone gets 240 phishing attempts, like, they're probably going to click on one of those. I mean, that's
KnowBe4 states that the utility average for over a year security awareness is 3.8%. So yeah, that's several clicks.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good deal. But, users like, they do click on those crazy things. They do visit sites that maybe even have like some, a legitimate backing. Maybe it's just someone misusing it. And one of the other things I've seen a lot is like people just try to visit URLs that they just normally are blocked, right? Like maybe you have, some seedier sites that, like I said, people get in their home, they kind of let their guard down a smidge, and they click on those kind of things.
Yeah. And yeah, just people, they get more comfortable and they'll do things that they won't do at the office. Even, some people are doing things that, maybe aren't really a bad thing. Like a lot of people are doing schoolwork and stuff like that. But that comes in, that can tie into like shadow IT, where people are installing unauthorized apps. Like Dropbox isn't a malicious tool, but it can be used in a negative way. So like they can have Dropbox, they can have Google Drive. And really one of my biggest fears, it sounds silly to be fearful of those, but we have OneDrive and we've got protection measures and backup measures and that. But really it's, them using Dropbox or Google Drive and uploading like company data, even something that might have PII or something like that in it. That's one of the things that does scare me.
Yeah, I mean, exfiltration is that's kind of one of the the standard MO, right? I mean, especially nowadays with ransomware. I mean, you get in, you try to exfiltrate data, and then you encrypt the machine. So now you have like the double ability, I guess, to ransom the person once to get the machine unlocked or once to get their data back before it gets public. So, yeah, there's a lot of legitimate uses to those kind of things, but it's kind of like anything, in the wrong hands, it's not something that you want to allow.
Yeah. And another thing, and this is something I'm going to fess up, guilty of this, and I actually explained this in my security training. So one morning, well, I say people, me, I remember it was like a Saturday morning, and like I took off Friday, and I looked at my phone, and I had like 300 or 400 unread emails, and I'm one of those things that's I got to just check that box. I've got to get the unread. That's kind of how I track whether I need to do something or not, is by the unread emails. And it was, early in the morning. I'm just sipping coffee, just blindly blowing through emails, just trying to get that number down so I don't have to worry about it when I get back to work. And I opened a phishing email from KnowBe4. Anyways, that was a pretty embarrassing deal. It was a while ago, but I can tell you, I've been much more mindful on just opening up emails. Just people getting that relaxed environment, and I'm guilty as charged. But it's a dangerous thing, and just like the KnowBe4, obviously, it was a test email, but if it was a real thing, that it could have been a much uglier story.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had similar things. We use MFA, and we've had people approve MFA, on the weekend. They would say, "Oh, I know that's probably just my work computer, connecting in," and obviously had to spend a lot of time on education there. But people, like you said, they get relaxed. And a lot of a lot of our controls are kind of based on being at the office, right? At least traditionally. I think things are changing, but we've had firewalls in place, and firewalls are great, especially the next gen firewalls. There's a lot of great things, and several companies that make those and put those out, but they do a lot of great things, but they're kind of a hardware appliance, and they're kind of put in a place, right? So you don't send someone home, with their laptop and a little tiny firewall and like plug this into your router. We have DNS protection sometimes at work. Things like that they get bypassed when we go home a lot of times. So I think we talked a little bit about kind of the struggles of what people are doing, and on the networks that they're on that are not secure. Like, what do we do about it? I think sometimes we kind of outsmart ourselves, I think, and try to like think about something really complicated, when in reality, what do we do about it? We just do the same things we do at work. I mean, right? We just need different tools, but we got to apply the same kind of policies, the same kind of rule sets and stuff like that at home that we do at work. So what are basic tenets? You got to harden the endpoints. Yeah, I think you mentioned this. It was one of your prior episodes before I joined. You were talking about CIS and the membership there. So if you haven't heard that one, definitely check that one out. I thought, for the price, it's kind of hard to beat that CIS membership. But one of the things that kind of stood out to me was the hardening guides, right? And we all know of like desktop hardening is a thing, but it's kind of complicated. And someone providing like that kind of stuff, that guide, that GPO, that's a big deal. Least privilege access, it's kind of like the basics, right? We know that we're not supposed to give people like local admins on their computers, right? And I think even in remote, you're sometimes more likely to like bypass something because you're like, okay, well, what if they can't do something? Then I have to go to their house, or they have to bring it in the office. Like, they're down, I can't walk to their office.
Yeah.
Things like that. And I think patches is one of the things, which I know there's some new tools, and I think you've got a new tool that you've actually started implementing. Prior, like, patches were kind of difficult. People had to have their computers on. They were downloading patches maybe even directly from you versus other sources. And that made things difficult. It made it harder to keep things up to date. So I think you said you guys had implemented something new that's really like helped out in this area, right?
When COVID started, but it was shortly after. It was when we had a lot of people that were, taken off because they had COVID and had to stay home and quarantine. But, a lot of times, people were wanting to work and capable of working, and some of them we needed to work. It first started with just supporting them. We tried Teams and them doing like a team share, and we had a lot of people that don't have stellar internet connections, and really just Teams. When you try to take control, I don't know what it is. Microsoft does build a lot of good products, but Teams does not work well with trying to share your screen and allow them to control it. So we were already using Endpoint Central and Manage Engine tool for updates and everything, but they had an add-on. It was called the Secure Gateway Server, and basically it would allow, as long as they were on the internet anywhere, it allowed us to continue to patch those, because that was the other thing we hit was, we had a lot of machines that weren't getting patched, and it was because they were at home, never coming back into the office, so it allowed us to patch those machines, and also allowed us to remote in and support them. It really wasn't a huge add-on. It was a very cheap add-on, and it has made a world of difference. And that's one of those things where, now that we have it, I can't imagine, not having it and supporting folks.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a key thing. I mean, we kind of harp on that over and over and over, right? Which is like, it's simple, it's patch patch your systems, patch your hardware, patch your software. It's one of the best things you could do, because you take a look at a lot of the security incidents that happen, and a lot of them happen after the vulnerability is released, right? So someone puts the vulnerability out, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, let's just see. Now there's a vulnerability. It's public knowledge. Like, everybody and their brother is out there trying to scan everyone. I see a lot of recon traffic after vulnerabilities are released for those things. And honestly, you can pretty much prevent that. And it's a free way to do it by just keeping things up to date. So there's some other things we can do. Limit the app store, whether it's Android or it's iOS. Obviously, if you're not just allowing them to install whatever. I mean, some of the apps, I will say one good thing is most of the mobile device OS is now, they're always asking. There's a lot of more privacy focus. So they're at least asking, hey, can we have access to your contacts? Can we have access to your pictures? Things like that. But at the same time, I mean, users, if they're trying to use an app, I mean, they're clicking through. I mean, I'm just as guilty. I've been there. You're just you see a cool app or someone showing you something, and you're not really paying attention to all the prompts. I mean, MFA on logins, this is kind of one of those basics as well. Whether it's a VPN login or whether you're logging into, O365 users at home, you got to have those MFA in place. And one of the things, I was doing some research on this, and I really hadn't thought about it, but standardizing hardware was something that came up, and I thought, well, that's actually pretty ingenious, because, if you've got a Lenovo laptops and Dell laptops and, everything else out there, HPs, things like that, and they're using like varying levels of network cards and varying levels of BIOS and things like that, it's really hard for you to kind of wrap your hands around it. If you have like kind of a standard build, standard laptop, makes it a little bit easier because you're not having to worry about 37 different models or something. So I thought that was that was something I had not thought about, and I definitely think it makes a lot of sense. Zero trust is one of the things. It's kind of like the, I don't know, buzzword, I guess. It's really been around for a long time, but it's really kind of, I think, caught a lot of steam recently. Basically, that's really the concept on when people go home, right? And it's really the concept when they're at the office. We don't think about it that way, but the idea is we got to treat the computer at the office has got to be treated the same as the computer on the home network. Just because it's at the office, it doesn't inherently make it more secure. I mean, a secure network is a secure network, and it doesn't matter really where it is, or a secure connection is a secure connection. And then one of the other things, as I was thinking about, that I've seen people do as a strategy is, if they were so worried about not having those corporate controls at the home, is to actually push out a VDI to the users. So instead of them providing like a full desktop to a user or a full laptop, sending them home with a terminal. And with a terminal that connects back into, a remote gateway, like you were saying, and can provide a desktop. And that desktop being inside your network, potentially has all those same controls and those, say protections, things like that. So there's there's a lot of things. I mean, is there anything you've thought about? Anything that, I think there's some other stuff that probably comes up as well.
Yeah, I guess just looking at, you've got to have some kind of protection software on your device, and really just EDR is kind of a standard these days. You have to have that at a minimum. We use CrowdStrike, and there's lots of applications out there, and there's a lot of good ones, but you have to have that. And so we do vulnerability scans, but we're doing vulnerability scans against our network. If a device is off the network, we're never going to know about those vulnerabilities. But like with CrowdStrike, they have an add-on called Spotlight, and it basically does vulnerability. It really scans the device that it's on and gives you, lets you identifies all the vulnerabilities that are on that. Anyways, you have to have EDR at a minimum, and then like DNS protect. So there's like Cisco Umbrella. There's a lot of DNS tools out there. I'm trying to think what Cisco Umbrella, they bought the organization. It used to be free. I think it was Easy DNS. I don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that's the Cisco way for sure. I had a good idea instead of making this up.
It was a good product, and it is a good product. But yeah, having if they're at home on their network, if you don't have some kind of DNS measures, they're going to be able to get to anything, whether it's your device or not. So you need to think about that, especially with today's environment. And then the microsegmentation. A lot of people, they know about segmentation, but what microsegmentation is really just taking it down to another level. One good example, one easy example to understand is, you've got all these workstations. So we've got a VLAN with all of our workstations on it. Well, those, my workstation doesn't need to talk to any other workstation in that network. I need to talk to servers. I need to talk to a printer. But the lateral movement between computers isn't needed. And microsegmentation tools, they can basically block that connectivity. Which is important. Like if you ever get a bad actor on that, it'll limit their lateral movement because they're not just able to connect to anything. And then the other thing is, your clients, if you've got a SOC, you need to make sure that they can manage, or they can get alerts from those devices, even if they're off your network. And that's another thing. Like, I'm not trying to be a CrowdStrike fanboy, but like our SOC, like they use CrowdStrike for their monitoring. So they'll, they get alerts whether they're on our network or off our network. And another thing is just using Duo. Duo isn't just a multi-factor authentication tool. It'll allow you to just ensure your devices are up to date, your browser's up to date. With a laptop, it can verify. Well, even with mobile devices, it can verify that they have encryption before it allows authentication. I don't hear about it so much. Maybe it's just because I'm becoming an old man, but back in the day, I used to hear about like jailbroken devices all the time, and people hacking it so they can get like free apps and stuff like that. It can check against that, and obviously, you don't want any jailbroken device to log on to anything. So it'll do quite a bit. It can also look at the locations. We use it, geo blocking. So anyone outside the US or Canada, they can't multi-factor into anything. And then another thing is it can identify if they're operating on a Tor network. If they're on a Tor network, you definitely don't want them on your stuff. And and you can make things easier on folks if they're on an authorized network. You can change things up. But Duo, it's not just an MFA tool. Like it can do a lot of other things in the. I know a lot of people that have that tool, but are they getting the full use out of it? And it really helps with this. And then I think just a huge thing is user education. Locking devices so my rule of thumb when I tell our users is if you can't see your device, then it needs to be locked. Whether that's you're too far from it, it's just right around the hallway. If you can't lay eyes on it, it should be locked. And unfortunately today for someone, they left their computer unlocked. And I looked around, there was no one by, and I went in on their teams and started talking about how wonderful Anthony is and what a great guy he is, which, everyone knows that's not the truth and it's me as soon as they see that. But anyways, like, I don't think you really need to get like upset about it or real negative on it. Doing that, like this user is going to remember that. And I'll say this, the folks that I've done it to before, like I've never found their workstation unlocked again, so you don't have to, if they're a repeat offender, that can be a different story. I think it's best really to try to take a lighthearted approach to it, at least initially, unless you have repeat offenders. But, people know that, like you want to make sure your workstation's locked because anything will get on it and do something. I don't do anything crazy or anything like that. And other people, like I did that. And then I was over in the finance department and they're like, we heard you were on someone's workstation. And it being lighthearted, it kind of spreads the word in a positive way. And people know that, hey, I shouldn't be leaving my workstation unlocked. And then another thing is just not letting other people use their device, which I know it happens. If I see it, I address it. But, especially at home, they may let their kid on to do homework or something like that, or their spouse or something like that. You really got to talk about these things with your security awareness. And I'll say this, like I know a lot of folks, and there's no issue with this, but like they'll use KnowBe4, like use the baked in training that they have. And I think that's good training and I think you should use it, but I think you should always do it in conjunction with live training that is from your folks. And I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with that, but I think it means more to folks and you can talk about specific cases, that your organization deals with. So I really suggest that you kind of couple it, use some baked in can training, but also do your own thing and spell out the things. And just a lot of people, I'm trying to think of the saying, but basically a lot of people need to hear things 3 times before they understand or comprehend it. And there is a lot of truth to that, so I tell people that, make sure you lock your workstation. Sometimes it takes that 3rd time. Just with anything, you got to keep repeating the message. I know it seems repetitive and, us folks in the industry, we know all this stuff, take it for granted sometimes, but not everyone knows this and you got to just keep repeating that message. Another thing that I think is good is just showing people, have I been pawned? Like we do this like really with our security awareness training. I'll pick a random person sometimes, or sometimes I'll pick someone on purpose, but we'll show that, if you're using, especially if you're using your work email address for other sites, like using it for Twitter or LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn's been hacked twice in the last couple of years, but
Mhm.
it showcases that if you're using the same password, you're going to have an issue eventually. So that's why Duo is important, or any multi-factor, because it does happen, unfortunately. But you got to show them, you got to give them a reason not to keep reusing their password. The site Have I Been Pawned? That's a great example to be able to do that.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, like we have had some users, I think some older users. I mean, not older really, like in like age, but like they've been around the co-op a lot longer. When
Hmm.
email kind of came out, like they only had one email, right? I mean, they had the work email. That was it because they didn't need an email for personal
Yeah.
reasons. And obviously,
Hmm.
employees that are coming in now at this point, most people have one email, maybe two emails. And so people just did that. I don't think it was like inherently their fault. They just didn't have another email address at the time and didn't think they needed one. And so, especially at retirement
Yeah.
time, we've had a lot of trouble with like, people having to kind of separate themselves, and that, like you said, that leads to potential vulnerability because, one of the things whenever I get like a personal email, with a package or things like that, I know that that's coming to my personal email. If it comes to my work email, it's most likely malicious, or it's, at the very least, it's just a link
Yeah.
to maybe like a credential harvesting website or something like that. Because I just don't get packages, at work, or if I do, I don't get emails about it, for personal packages I order and things like that. So because they just really didn't have another option, there's been like, more vulnerability there, I think, than usual.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, that is a good point because we still deal with this. Matter of fact, we had someone that just recently retired. Well, I say that it's been a couple years now, but, they had never had a personal email address before. And, we wanted to see them do well afterwards, and they relied on email, and we kind of talked with them about creating an email address, how to do that, and gave them some recommendations. But it still happens today. Like, I know
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's a lot of folks that don't have an email address, but yeah, it's definitely getting less common these days. Another thing that kind of scares me, and this is something that we really, broadcast to the folks at our organization, is that our iPads, they're all on a private network. So we've got several carriers, but all of them are on our private network. And we'll hold it up, and if someone has this, if a bad entity has this, they have the keys of the kingdom. They have access to everything on our network almost. So that's something, if you've got iPads or phones on the APN, you really need to discuss that and make people understand. Because, with the iPad especially, some people give it to their kid, kids screaming or something like that, and they're at a restaurant, they may give them their work iPad. Is it malicious in intent? No, they're just trying to get their kid quiet. But some consequences can happen from that. And they could go and download some app. If you're allowing them to just download anything from the app store, they may put a game on there or something like that they shouldn't, and they may have something with it. The social media, I think people really need to understand, and I think a lot of people think LinkedIn as a work tool, and I'm not saying it isn't. It is in many cases, but I really have a hard time suggesting that anyone uses their work email address for LinkedIn. That people change careers, so I don't think it's a good idea, anyways. But one thing that we have had a lot of issues out of this, so people using their work phone number and their email address in LinkedIn, and we've had a lot of targeted text phishing or spear phishing attacks against our users, and it's so bad that. I mean, everyone is aware we do a lot of training on that because we really haven't found a method to get rid of it, except for we'll tell people like you need to ensure that you're not using your phone number and stuff like that, but by the time it happens, it's already too late.
Mm-hmm.
They've already provided that. That's one of those things, like I talked about the Zoom info and getting that information back. Well, that user was still at like 40 or 40 emails, and once the cat's out of the bag, like you can't pull it in completely. And the same thing goes with like LinkedIn. Once that data is out there, you can try to do something about it, but for the most part, once the data is out there, it's out there. But we've had the last two new employees come on. They're getting basically someone impersonating our CEO reaching out to them, and
Mm-hmm.
they're and the what we found is they're if you go into our company's web or LinkedIn page, it actually shows certain people's employees. You can't find me there because I mean, I put that I work there, but I'm not associated with the account. But the people that get associated with the account, they're getting attacked. If they have their phone number, they're texting them saying, "Hey, this is CEO. Shoot me a text as soon as you get this." And, we have to be really vigilant on the training. I suggest and I don't know. I'd be welcome for input on this, but I don't feel like I can tell them to not put their phone number in there. I feel like that's kind of crossing the line, but I suggested them, take your phone number off there, just watch what you do. And I would not use a 4 county account to do it. So I don't know if you've got any suggestions for that, but that's one of those things where I don't know of a way to.
Not anything off the top of my head. The only thing I was going to add is like, even if you kind of take away the, potential, I guess, like you said, the phishing, part of it, a lot of times you get associated to in a company, you just get a ton of phone calls from different vendors. I mean, even if it's just legitimate, it can be, it can type your phone. I know I get a lot of vendor phone calls, and they always ask for 5 minutes, which if I gave them all 5 minutes, it'd be all that I did. But one thing they'll do is, if you don't respond, they'll find someone else in the company. We've had this happen a lot. Sometimes if you're associated with the company, if like, okay, well, this sounds like a technical role, or this sounds like an accounting role. If I can't get one accountant to respond, I'll just hit up one of the other accountants. Even kind of to take away the like cyber kind of aspect of it. A lot of times it's just kind of like stuff that non-requested stuff. I'm blanking on the word, but it's just, you're not asking for it, but it's still taking up your time. And, those are the kind of things, you see contacts, you see emails from people. Like, the more email you have, like you said, you were just talking about that earlier, you're saying, if I have 100 email, I feel like I got to clear it out. Well, like, the more email you have, the more email you get. It's just, you kind of, maybe you're not giving every email like quite the look that you should.
One last thing that I would suggest is, I see this, and this is a leadership issue to some degree, but if you have a retired device, you need to make sure you're collecting that. I know, you may have a senior leadership person or a CEO or even a board member, but once a device is retired, don't leave that device with them. Those are the ones that, the grandkids will get on, the kids will get on, the spouse will get on. You need to collect that. That needs to be a firm stamp or a firm hand with that. And especially with like devices. So I can't say that there's no reason to not have a like device, but for the most part, there never is. So if people have a laptop, why do they need another laptop? They can just, get them another docking station if they need to work from home. Even the monitors is better than getting them a second laptop. And like iPads, if you're retiring an iPad, they don't need to have a second one. Those are the ones that, especially if you're leaving your data on there, they're going to be susceptible and they'll probably be misused. So if you're going to give them back, like, they 100% need to be wiped, and explain that this is not for work. I know that's really, I think, all you can do, but I just think having those extra devices out there, you really got to, and you need to know what's on your network and everything too. So you really got to have good accountability with that.
To, for those retired devices, to basically say like they have to be returned, because a lot of people, I know in a lot of the worlds, a lot of people that probably listen to us now, they're either in the cooperative world, local government, some of these kind of organizations where people, they tend to stay a long time, right? And they kind of want their device, I guess, when they're about to leave, obviously. And I hated being that kind of person that like had to make that decision. So we just made a policy that, like, if the retired device has to come in, we do a employee auction. If they want to buy it, they can buy it as part of that. But it's just kind of a black and white policy. And honestly, it's been a lot better because people kind of understand. They know there's not a lot of, hemming and hawing, I guess, whenever they get a new device or whenever, they're getting ready to retire, things like that. And it's made it a lot better. We've been able to wipe it, like you said, and things like that. So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about, basically, what do we do, obviously, when the users aren't at work? And it really comes down to those simple cyber, the tenets that we all know. It's just now our world is moving past the office, right? It's moving to those far reaches. And one of the things I was thinking about as you were kind of talking through all the different things you can add, you were talking through EDR, you were talking through some of that. One of the things that's kind of come on recently, at least in the cyber world, has been this basically inclusion, I guess, of all these cloud, connected products, right? And that really makes things a lot easier. Because if someone does go home, if you have that control plane in the cloud, excuse me, like CrowdStrike, like you were saying, that data is getting sent to them. You're not having to make firewall rules back through your networks to try to collect data. Really makes it a lot easier. And I think the industry's kind of responding, right? They know that people are starting to work more remote. And so there's beginning to be more and more tools. You mentioned microsegmentation is kind of a newer tool, something we started taking a look at and implementing some policies. and just trying to basically, computers really don't need to talk to each other all that much. And that can really apply whether it's at home and you got a smart speaker or a printer or something else on your home network. I mean, it doesn't really need to be talking to that work laptop. So obviously there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of different pieces of software that really play a role. But in reality, the basic cyber tenants are the basic cyber tenants, and they apply whether someone's at the office or the remote. One thing that's kind of, I guess, in my career that has kind of fallen by the wayside is this perimeter-based cyber approach. And with people going home, it's just no longer sufficient anymore. We talked about that, the devices that they're on their network with, who knows what they are. They could be be a smart speaker, a smart TV. I heard a presentation just a couple of days ago, a keynote that I was watching, and they were talking about a botnet of refrigerators. So there's just so many things that are connected nowadays, and having that just one device at the perimeter of the firewall, it just can't work whenever those devices are moving in and out. And zero trust, we talked about it, it's just essential. You'd have to treat every network as it's on the internet. And I think this is really changing our thought process at work a lot, is trying to remember, like, if we get a chat from someone, do we trust it, right? Because do we need to double verify important communication, things like that? And like, I think you hit on it. You hit on it big with the user education, because it really comes down to user education. If users aren't looking, they aren't aware, they're taking kind of it easy. They don't know the current things. And that's really what our job is. I mean, our job is protection, but our job is education too. I mean, we're the people that are supposed to be, keeping track of what's current and what's the newest threat. And if we're not, properly training those people, then, really we're letting them down. So I think we've covered a lot of things. And we got some interesting kind of like subtopics I think we're going to take out of this podcast. I think we have some other ideas on maybe like a zero trust podcast and some microsegmentation maybe potentially as well. So kind of stay tuned, everyone. We're going to have some like deeper dives, I guess, into the individual things we implemented. But like I said, I think sometimes we just try to get into our own heads too much. And there's like this magic bullet, or there's magic, policy that I can put in place that really just like does everything. When in reality, it's all those small policies that we put in place over the years. It's just figuring out a way to implement those at home.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, like I like my fancy tools, but really just doing the security basics, the fundamentals, that's really going to get you the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, and they're pretty cheap. Last time I checked. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for everybody for joining us for Off the Wire podcast. I thought this was a really fun episode. We talked a lot about some interesting things, and really kind of changing the way we're thinking as more and more users are moving to their home environment, and really just to anywhere, hotels, etc. We talked about that. So just want to tell everyone where they can find us, offthewirepodcast.com. Right now it's linking to our Podbean page, but we're going to do some more work on that, kind of put up links to our social media there, and other things as we continue to kind of upgrade, I guess, our social media pages. But you can also find us wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, any of the other podcasting platforms. We put out podcasts every other week. We got another podcast episode. I'm really excited about that topic as well. And like I said, just a couple little drops. We got some kind of deep dives coming up on some of the things we talked about tonight. And if you haven't got a chance to, definitely go back and listen to some of the earlier podcasts. Anthony did a great job on the CIS one. That's just one that's really stuck out in my mind, something that we're looking into. But yeah, Anthony, I appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to going through some more episodes together.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And matter of fact, like I mentioned before, Tanner came up with a lot of great topics. And as soon as I saw this one, I was like, we definitely got to cover this one. But yeah, it was great to have you on the podcast. And one thing, this is something we enjoy doing. And, we talked about, just everyone knows, like in the IT industry and cybersecurity industry, you constantly have to be learning. And, just us doing these episodes, that helps us learn. And we're hoping it helps you all as well. Hopefully you can apply some of this back at your organization. But with that said, just thank you again, Tanner, for joining us, and can't wait for future episodes. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next episode. Thank you. Bye.